The brightest promises often hide the darkest pacts. Behind laughter, red cups, and golden futures, there are basements where more than loyalty is demanded, blood is. This is the story of a brotherhood, and the exact price of belonging. My name's Chuck, and in the fall of 1996, I was an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Alabama, wide-eyed and desperate to fit in. I'd grown up a farm boy in a small town, the kind where everybody knows your business, and college was my shot at becoming the first in my family to make it out into the big bad world. I wanted to be somebody. When my mama first got sick, I remember always thinking I could get smart enough to cure her. That didn't pan out, but my sense of optimism didn't break apart because of it. I just tried to motivate myself even more. That's why I rushed Delta Kappa Epsilon, or DKE, the fraternity with the best parties, the best connections, and the kind of reputation that could open doors for someone like me. I didn't realize back then that some doors lead to places you can never come back from. During rush, where groups of kids go house to house and sort of man-flirt their way into the right fit, I'd mentioned my dad was a Clemson alumni, so the brothers all took to Calendly stripes, both because Clemson's mascot was the tiger, and also because a cowardly tiger shows his true stripes at some point. The two schools were pretty big football rivals. Pledging started out like I expected. Me and the other pledges, 20 of us, all nervous and trying to act tough, got dragged out of our dorms at 2 a.m. by brothers in ski masks. They loaded us into vans, blindfolded, and drove us to some backwoods field. The air smelled like pine needles and cheap beer, and when they ripped off our blindfolds, we were standing in a circle of tiki torches, the brothers screaming at us to chug warm Natty Light or do push-ups in the mud until our arms gave out. When one pledge puked, another pledge had to chug a mouthful of beer to spit it in his face to wake him back up. It was humiliating, sure, but it felt like a rite of passage. I'd seen Animal House. I thought I knew what I was in for. Gross I could handle. I grew up on a farm after all. My best friend in the pledge class was Tommy. He was from Mobile, a lanky kid with a quick laugh and a knack for diffusing tension. We bonded the first weekend when we both got stuck cleaning the frat house kitchen after a party, scrubbing vomit off the linoleum, while the brothers laughed and threw bottle caps at us. Tommy was the kind of guy who'd crack a joke about it, make it bearable. "We're basically Cinderella, man," he'd say, grinning. "Just waiting for our fairy godmother to show up with a cup for the keg." Tommy was pre-med as well, so we got into a good habit of studying together at the libraries before lineups. He was poor too, but he never asked for anything. "I'm just happy to be doing this, man. It's like a movie." Our pledge educator, a fancy title for the brother in charge of training us on how to be brothers, was a senior named Kurt, a larger-than-life guy who loved chain smoking cigarettes and playing darts. Most of the information we learned seemed important at the time. What year did DKE arrive on campus? Who were our founding fathers? But in reality, no one really remembered this shit after graduation. What I remembered most about Kurt was the time incident. See, midway into the process, 2 pledges get selected to show up to the house after a lineup, the smartest and the best drinker. This is right after the pledge ed gets fired for us not learning fast enough, something dramatized and something that happens for every single pledge class, regardless of how well they're doing with retaining dumb dates and facts. Tommy and I were the ones selected here. Tommy was the better drinker. I'd been doing the best on the weekly tests at lineup, and they immediately spouted out a super long quote to us and then asked us what time it was. If we couldn't recite the quote back perfectly, we took a shot of Jameson from a nearly full handle in front of us. The quote itself was challenging, but the hard part was trying to memorize it before the alcohol hit our systems. Tommy got it surprisingly fast, in a little under 10 tries, while I hadn't even gotten through the first half. "You can leave now, Tommy. I know you've got class tomorrow, or you can stay here. And every time you go, that's another chance for Chuck to hear the full quote," Kurt said with a dark gaze to his eyes. "I reckon I'll stay then," Tommy said solemnly, giving me a knowing glance before rattling off the quote once more. I got close, for whatever that was worth, but as the alcohol sunk in, both of us became sloppier and sloppier until eventually that handle was gone. 2 of us had drank it, and it was gone. No one ever fucks it up this bad. Kurt seemed furious, as he reached for another handle to put up on the table. Thankfully, the other brother stopped him, but I could see in his eyes this was genuine anger. I don't remember much of the rest of the night, but I'm grateful I survived. Tommy and I were quick to pull trigger after we left the event, and fell asleep in his dorm, puking into buckets and regretting the full day of classes to come. The hazing got worse as the weeks went on. They'd wake us up at random hours, make us run laps around the house in our underwear at sunrise, force us to recite the Greek alphabet while they dumped ice water on us. I nearly dropped out when during one event one of the brothers announced loudly he was going to piss on us. "Take your pick, pledges. It only has to be one of you." Our pledge class president, a position of unwanted responsibility, more than anything to be proud of, was a kid named Marty from Los Angeles, a lean dude with an unbreakable smile, and he quickly turned to scan over our ranks before pointing his finger at me. "You never have to do any of the hard stuff, Chuck." Others started to agree, only for Tommy to jump into my rescue right as I found myself preparing to walk. "Chuck's got a girl waiting on him later. I'll do it, I don't care, it all washes off, right?" I loved Tommy in that moment, but I didn't fully comprehend the sacrifice he'd made. He'd shown he was willing to put his neck on the line for us, and no one was going to forget that. The next night for line-up, they lined us up in the basement, and made us sing some of the old DKE drinking anthems while holding lit candles in a human pyramid while in our underwear. If you messed up a word, they'd take the candle from your hand, press the hot wax onto your arm. At one point, after fucking up twice in a row, one of the drunker brothers grabbed my arm with a grin and stared me in the eyes as he burnt into my skin. "A tiger needs its color, right, Stripes?" I still have a scar on my wrist from that night. Tommy got it worse because he flinched when they pressed the wax, and they kept doubling the time as punishment. He didn't complain, though. He just winked at me afterward, like it was all part of the game. By the time Hell Week rolled around, we were exhausted. The brothers had us running on no sleep, chugging liquor until we puked, and doing trust exercises that felt more like psychological torture. It started off with just loops of the same annoying song on over and over during lineups or events, which was annoying, but at least it was funny to riff about after. But as time went on, shit got darker. One night they locked us in a room with no lights and played recordings of people screaming, while making us stand in a circle. They told us to confess our worst fears while they mocked us, each pledge getting his own personal taste of torture. I admitted I was scared of ending up alone, a nobody. Tommy said he was afraid of drowning, which got a big laugh from the brothers. "Good to know, pledge," one of them shouted, bumping an elbow playfully into Kurt's side, and I saw a glint in their eyes that made my stomach twist. Hell Week was held at an old plantation house the fraternity owned, about an hour outside Tuscaloosa, not officially registered to the fraternity through any university channels. It was a crumbling relic, surrounded by overgrown fields and a murky creek that smelled like decay. The brothers called it the Lodge, and it was where DKE's initiation rituals had been held for decades. We arrived in a convoy of nondescript cars and beat-up trucks, the 20 of us pledges crammed into the back of 3 of them like cattle. The brothers were different out there, less rowdy, more focused. I thought I saw an older guy who'd always been kind of nice get into an argument early on with our ex-pledge Ed Kurt, and I could have sworn he was actually crying, but that seemed crazy. We were just pledges to them. What was he worried about? Still, something had shifted in the process. Now they didn't joke as much, and their eyes had this intensity that made me feel like I was being watched, judged. The first night at the lodge was brutal. They split us into groups and made us compete in these sadistic games, carrying buckets of rocks across the field, blindfolded, while they tripped us or sprayed us with hoses. If your group lost, you'd get penalties, which meant more drinking or running until you collapsed. When 2 teams were eliminated, They had to each pick a member to take a hit in the balls from Kurt, who for the course of Hell Week had retitled himself Hayes Master General. Tommy and I were in the same group, and we kept each other going. He'd whisper stupid jokes when the brothers weren't looking, and I'd help him up when he stumbled. We were a team, you know? I thought we'd make it through together. They had us staying in a large closet more or less, with a table set up in the center meant to take up as much space as possible, and 18 chairs placed around it just tight enough to ensure no one could find the space to lay down. We were allowed to do school work and study fraternity information, but nothing else. No going back to our dorms, no going out for food, and even conversations were frowned upon, forcing us to resort to hushed whispers over the sound of a constantly blasting song. The end. By the doors that we usually got away with. I learned down the line that newly initiated brothers from the year before were supposed to be finding excuses to sneak in to bring us food throughout the week, but the guys we had were either lazy or hated us. I think at one point we got a bag of chips. For our real dinners, brothers visited local foreign food markets, combining the grossest range of things they could find, ranging from clam juice to sheep stomach and even deep-fried insects, though it was better than drinking on an empty stomach. I tried to keep my spirits up by focusing on classwork. Tommy and I had our lab final the next week, and at least we could study together. The second night was a little scarier. Brothers set up a light bulb in one of the darker corners of the room and would call us in one by one in our underwear, forcing our heads up as our eyes strained against the light, and they'd force us to try to read off the small text on its underside before running us through a bunch of random fraternity knowledge-related questions. When we were wrong, we took a large bite from an onion on our necks, reciting a dumb simple quote. "I'm always wrong, I'm never right. In fact, I'll take another bite, sirs." Marty was allergic to onions, so they had him do ghost peppers instead. I could see him growing more and more red, though his stomach was so empty and raw that he couldn't manage to puke up anything. Just a lot of painful dry heaving and retching. Tommy managed to find the silver lining, though. They thought they were gonna starve us, huh? I fucking love onions. The third night was the scariest night I'd experienced so far. Kurt, or Hayes Master General, as he'd been insisting we call him, assigned each pledge someone to go under the light with, whom he referred to as our Thunder Buddy, where both parties needed to know each question. The quizzes got a lot more difficult, and so did the screaming, and they'd purposefully paired people who'd been good at retaining the information with people who weren't in order to ensure fuck-ups all throughout the night. Tommy was my Thunder Buddy, luckily, and we did all right, others not so much. Marty and his Thunder Buddy, a kid from Florida named Sam, spent nearly 2 hours straight in there towards the tail end of the night, coming back to our room well past sunrise. Sam was speechless, shaking as pale as a ghost in the corner, and Tommy skipped over a few seats to check in with him. "You don't have to finish this, man. None of us are gonna stop being your friends. These guys can't actually stop you from just walking out of here, dude. If it's both airing you, just like..." A sense of recognition seemed to hit Sam's face, as if he realized for the first time all week this was still possible. "Leave." Marty immediately tried to jump in for damage control, but once the idea was seated in his head, Sam was already packing his bags. The room was silent enough to hear a needle drop, other than Tommy, who kept quietly encouraging Sam despite Marty's attempts to sway him. We'd had a couple of kids drop out by this point, but walking out the door with less than a week left was practically unheard of. Still, Sam had never been as into it as others. He was a legacy, which meant he got an automatic bid because of someone in his family, and frankly I was shocked he'd made it this far. He was way too soft for some of the shit these guys threw at us. As he forced his way through, the brother standing guard at the door, who seemed shocked but made no efforts to stop him, Marty stood from his seat by the door and brazenly tried to shove a finger into his face for one last plea. "Why you can't just abandon your Thunder Buddy? Do you know what they're going to do to me?" The next morning, we found out. By the time the fourth night rolled around, Marty was on the verge of collapse, pale as paper, shaking consistently, and covered in bruises far beyond child's play. He literally couldn't speak after, but we'd find out later via a handheld camcorder that he'd been singled out for the Gauntlet of Truth, a ritual where he had to recite the fraternity's history flawlessly. Each misstep, be it a stammered date or a forgotten founder's name, brought a swift, punishing blow, either with a paddle or a fist. One senior, his breath heavy with whiskey, landed a stinging backhand across Ethan's cheek when he fumbled the founding year, splitting his lip and knocking out one of his canines in the process. Another brother's paddle thudded into Marty's shin when he missed a Greek letter in the chant, the bone visibly warped through the skin of his scrawny legs come line up that night. A drunken senior describing his knees buckling, but that he was yanked upright by his hair, forced to continue as sweat and blood mingled together, dripping onto the floor whilst he crossed the finish line. The brothers' jeers grew louder, their eyes gleaming with a mix of sadistic glee and tradition-fueled fervor, as Marty's voice cracked but persisted, into a weak semblance of victory when he crossed the line. Brotherhood. The hazing that followed was by all intents and purposes kind of fun. Questions shifted from fraternity knowledge to sillier things like, which brother gets the most girls? I found myself holding a beer while lined up in the hallway at one point, even cracking a smile as Marty managed to pull off a shotgun despite his hobbled circumstances. Tommy at one point wrapped an arm around my shoulder and pulled me close, the optimism in his voice sending shivers up my spine. Tonight could be the night, man. Tonight we might be done. We weren't. On the fifth night, things changed for the worst. They gathered us in the basement of the lodge, a damp, stone-walled room lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with mildew, and there was this faint, metallic smell I couldn't quite place. The brothers were all there, wearing these creepy black robes with hoods, like something out of a bad horror movie. The chapter president, a senior named Garrett, stepped forward. He was a big guy, pre-law, with a smile that never reached his eyes. Tonight, he said, we separate the men from the boys. DKE isn't just a fraternity. It's a brotherhood forged in sacrifice. If you want to be one of us, you have to prove you're willing to pay the price. I thought he meant more hazing, maybe something worse than before. I was wrong. They handed each of us a knife, small, sharp, with a bone handle carved with the DKE crest. Garrett explained the ritual. The lodge demands loyalty, he said. It demands blood. Every pledged class gives something to keep the balance. Those who give the most are rewarded. Those who don't, well, they don't belong. He gestured to the floor, and I noticed for the first time that there were stains on the stone, dark, uneven patches that looked too much like dried blood. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just theatrics. Frats did weird stuff, right? Secret handshakes, creepy rituals, it was all part of the mystique. But then Garrett called out 5 names, including Tommy's. They had each been selected by cabinet for some slight or wrong answer, an unwarranted chuckle, or maybe even because they just looked at someone the wrong way. The chosen pledges were led to the center of the room, and the rest of us were told to stand against the walls. The brothers started chanting in a language I didn't recognize, low and guttural, like a prayer to something ancient. Tommy looked at me, his eyes wide, and I saw real fear there for the first time. They blindfolded the 5 pledges and tied their hands behind their backs. Garrett said, "The lodge has chosen. To join us, you must offer a sacrifice. What of these 5 will pay the price tonight? The rest of you will decide who." My stomach dropped. This wasn't hazing. This was something else, something wrong. I wanted to run, to grab Tommy and get the hell out, but the brothers were watching us, their knives glinting in the dim light. They gave us a choice: pick one of the 5 to die, or the ritual would claim more. "The lodge always gets its due," Garrett said. "If you don't choose, it chooses for you." The other pledges were panicking, whispering, trying to figure out what to do. Some guy, a scrawny kid named Ryan, started crying and saying he didn't sign up for this. A brother slapped him hard and told him to shut up. I looked at Tommy, blindfolded and kneeling in the center of the room. I wanted to save him, I swear I did. But I was scared of dying, scared of losing everything I'd worked for. DKE wasn't just a frat, it was a ticket to a better life. Garrett had told us stories about alumni who were CEOs, senators, guys who ran the world because of the connections they'd made here. I wanted that. I needed it. The pledges started arguing, throwing out names. Some said Ryan, because he was weak, always whining. Others pointed at a guy named Chris, who'd mouthed off to the brothers one too many times. But a few kept looking at Tommy, saying he was too soft, too much of a joker. I tried to defend him, but my voice was shaking, and nobody listened. The brothers didn't care who we picked, they just wanted it done. In the end, we voted. It was anonymous, scraps of paper dropped into a box. I wrote Ryan's name, I swear I did. But when Garrett counted the votes, Tommy's name came up the most. I don't know if it was rigged, or if the other pledges really turned on him. Maybe I should have fought harder, screamed, done something. But I didn't. I just stood there, frozen, as they untied Tommy and led him to a stone altar at the far end of the basement. The chanting got louder, and Garrett raised his knife. Tommy was sobbing now, begging, saying he didn't want to die. I couldn't look at him, couldn't face the betrayal in his eyes. The brothers told us this was the final test. If we wanted to be DKE, we had to participate. They handed me the knife and told me to make the first cut. "You're his thunder buddy!" And I did. My true fucking stripes finally showed. I fucking did it, okay? It's hard to find the words to describe it, but I felt like I was outside my body, watching someone else move my hand. I told myself it was just a test, that they'd stop it at the last second. But they didn't. I won't describe what happened next. I can't. The sounds, the smells, the way the room seemed to pulse with something alive and hungry, it's all burned into my brain. When it was over, Tommy was gone, and the brothers were clapping, saying we'd finally proven ourselves. They told us the lodge was pleased, that we'd secured our futures. Jobs, money, power, it was all ours now, sealed in blood. The end of Hell Week was a blur. They burned Tommy's clothes in a bonfire and swore us to secrecy. The lodge protects its own, Garrett said. But it punishes traitors. I didn't sleep for days, seeing Tommy's face every time I closed my eyes. I thought about running, going to the cops, but what could I say? Who'd believe me? DK had alumni everywhere, cops, judges, politicians. I'd seen the photos on the walls of the lodge, generations of brothers smiling like they knew they were untouchable. I stayed. I became a brother. They gave me a pin, a handshake, a place at the table. The other pledges who made it through never talked about that night, but I saw it in their eyes, the same guilt, the same fear. We were bound by what we'd done, and there was no going back. Now I'm 47, with a corner office at a law firm in Birmingham. I've got a wife, 2 kids, a house with a pool. I'm living the American dream, just like Garrett promised. But every year, when the leaves turn and the air gets crisp, I think about Tommy. I think about the choice I made, the knife in my hand, the blood on the stone. I wonder if I could have saved him, if I could have run and never looked back. But I didn't. I chose this life, and I paid the price. So did Tommy. And the worst part? If I had to do it again, I'm not sure I'd choose any different. Brotherhood, man.